All right, how's everybody doing today? Back again with another video for you guys and gals, and today we're gonna do something a little bit different. So today what I have for y'all is a triple comparison video between the Moto G7 Power, the Bold N1, and the Y9 Prime 2019. Now I was going to do this in my traditional format, but I figured why not have a three-way comparison and just stack all three devices up side by side in one video and see if we could do it extremely fast. So we're going to dive into some housekeeping, and then we're going to dive directly into this versus/comparison video between these three devices, and then by the end of it I'm going to let y'all know which one I would recommend over the others, so on and so forth. So let's do the housekeeping first. So recording this video here today, we are using the rear facing 12 megapixel camera on the Samsung Galaxy S7 Active. This video is being recorded in 720p resolution at 30 frames per second, and we are using the Movo MA2010 omnidirectional microphone to record all of the audio. So as always, please let me know what you think of the overall video quality as well as the overall audio quality down below in the comments. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. And if you guys and gals enjoy this video, please help your boy out by giving the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below if y'all would like to see more content like this. And if this video piques your interest, all the links to where y'all can pick up these three devices will be available down below in the video description as space allows, okay? So, housekeeping done. Without further ado, let's get into this video. Now, starting off, the first thing I want to talk about between these three devices with you guys and gals is the overall build quality and design between the three. Now, in terms of the overall build quality, these devices are extremely close. Now, they're all made out of a glass and metal design. In particular, we got glass on the front with your metal on the back. So in particular, for the Y9 Prime, we have IPS LCD on the front, and then we got like a metal unibody on the back here, okay? And the same rules apply for the Bold N1, but it is a glass on glass design. So we got Gorilla Glass 5 on the front and Gorilla Glass 5 on the back. We're going to get into what makes this device special as we go throughout the video. So that's the only difference in terms of the build and design on this. And when we talk about the G7 Power here, it's the same as the Y9 Prime, except for it has an IPS LCD Gorilla Glass 3 display on the front, and then it's like a glass unibody-esque or glass-stick type design on the back. All right. So in terms of the overall build quality and design between these three devices, I'll have to say all three devices are really, really good. Now you can see I have clear TPU style cases on all three devices, and they look really, really good. They all have a really good weight to them, and they feel very solid in the hands. That being said, in terms of the overall feel in the hands, I'd have to say the Bold N1 feels the more balanced of the three, has a nice balanced weight to it and a nice feel in the hand. Whereas for the G7 Power, this one feels more weighty and more substantial, but there's a reason for that we're going to get into as we walk through this video here. But in terms of the overall build quality and design, I feel like all three of these manufacturers did a great job, and it really just comes down to personal preference. So whether it's Motorola, whether it's Bold, or whether it's Huawei, all three of these manufacturers, in my opinion, did a great job in terms of their build quality and design. So good stuff there. All right, we're calling this category, or these two categories, a tie. All right. Moving on now, let's talk about the overall displays on these devices, and let me set them up in order of size. So we're going to put the biggest display device to the far right, and we're going to go down, so on and so forth. So talking about the displays, the biggest display device in this video is the Huawei Y9 Prime with its 6.6 inch or 6.56 inch, 6.569 inch or 6.6 inch IPS LCD display. It has a 1080p display with a screen density of 391 pixels per inch. So really good stuff. And that was all the technical stuff in terms of the display, if you guys and gals want to know. Now that stacks up directly in comparison to the 1080p 6.4 inch Gorilla Glass 5 Super AMOLED display on the Bold N1. Alright, and let's light this one up so y'all can see it. And again, this is another great display in my opinion. This bad boy has a screen density of 403 pixels per inch and is probably one of the brightest displays that I have with the Super AMOLED technology. This is a great display in terms of daily performance, and it again is also 1080p. Just for you guys and gals that wanted to know the technical specs there. And that's directly composing the 6.2 inch IPS LCD Gorilla Glass 3 display on the Moto G7 Power. Now this is a 720p display as opposed to the 1080p displays that y'all see it comparing against. But in terms of the display on this one, I'd have to say it's a really good display. Now, in terms of the displays, in terms of daily performance, all three of these displays do a great job. But if I had to pick a winner between the three, I would have to give it to the Bold N1. In terms of the displays, in terms of daily performance, I did find that I have to run the Huawei and or the Motorola at a higher brightness level for it to be sufficient. And that's indoors. When I go outdoors, I pretty much have to max them out in order for it to be sufficient. Whereas with the Bold N1, and thanks to that Super AMOLED 1080p display, y'all can see it's nice and bright, and I don't even have to keep the brightness that high. And you can see even for this video, it's still super bright. So on average, when I'm using the IPS LCD displays indoors, I have to keep them between 50 and 80% respectively. Outdoors, I pretty much have to max them out. When I'm using the Super AMOLED display indoors, I can rock it at about 20 to 35%, and then outdoors, I rarely ever have to bump it up past 50%. So in the display category, whereas I feel like all three of these displays do a really great job, if I had to pick a winner, I would have to give it to the Bold N1 in terms of the displays. Okay, so W going to the Bold N1 for this category right here. All right. Now, moving on, I just want to dive a little bit deeper into the hardware and the software on all three of these devices. Now this is where we're going to highlight some of the major similarities and some of the major differences between the three devices. So let's jump in. Now across the board, all three of these devices that you see in this video come with 4 gigs of onboard RAM. They all come with micro SD card expansion as well, but where they differ is that the G7 Power here has a dedicated micro SD card expansion slot, whereas the Bold N1 and the Huawei Y9 Prime have a hybrid style setup. So when I say hybrid, that means you have to choose between using 2 nano SIMs or a nano SIM and a micro SD card, whereas you don't have to make that decision with your Moto G7 Power because you could use 2 SIMs and a dedicated micro SD card. So that's the first major difference in terms of the hardware. Now in terms of the onboard storage, they do come in a variety of different configurations. So for the Huawei, it comes in a 464 or a 4128 variant. The Bold just comes in one configuration, 404 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of onboard storage. Okay, so that's that. And then the G7 Power comes in a few different varieties. So it comes in a 332 globally unlocked variant. It comes in a 364 GSM unlocked variant. And then it comes in a 464 GSM unlocked variant. And in this video, you guys and gals are seeing the 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of onboard storage variant. Okay, Talking about some more hardware between the three. Now, in terms of the battery capacity, the Huawei has a 4,000 milliamp hour battery directly compared to the 3,500 milliamp hour battery on the Bold N1, which pales in comparison to the 4,850 milliamp hour battery on the Moto G7 Power. All right, so that's another difference there. Now, so one of the similarities that I want to point out between the three devices are, and this was kind of interesting, but I'm going to point it out nonetheless. In terms of your button setup, they're all pretty much configured in the same style. So they all have their volume buttons and power buttons on the same side, as you can see here. So the the power button is on the bottom and your volume rockers are on the top. In terms of clickiness and button feedback, all three of these devices do a great job. Now, I do want to point out the fact that the Moto device and the Bold device do have a ridge power button, so it's a little bit easier for you to differentiate between the two if you're using it in darker environments, whereas the Huawei has all smooth buttons, but it's still very clicky. Okay, so that was interesting that the setup is the same. Also, all three of these devices feature USB Type-C, and all three of these devices have their 3.5 millimeter headphone jacks. But where it differs is the Huawei and the Bold have it on the bottom left and bottom right for the headphone jack and speakers respectively, whereas in terms of the speakers, for the G7 Power, we have one front-facing speaker built into the receiver, and then we have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack up top here. So that's the difference between the three, but they all have USB Type-C charging, and they all support fast charging of some sort. Now, in terms of the fast charging capabilities on this, and we're going to touch on it a little bit more in the battery section, the Bold N1 does have the faster charging with its up to 18 watt fast charging support, whereas the Huawei and the G7 Power only support 15 watt fast charging in their respective varieties. So turbo power charging or 15 watt fast charging respectively. So that's a difference in hardware right there. Now, as I already said, they all have nano SIM card support with micro SD card expansion, and they all three have some pretty respectable batteries in their own right. Okay, now in terms of the cameras, we have a dual camera setup for the Bold on the rear, so a 16 megapixel primary and a 5 megapixel depth sensor. Okay, whereas we have a 13 megapixel pop-up camera for the Bold. All right. And that is directly in comparison to the traditional setup on the G7 Power, which is a 12 megapixel rear-facing camera and an 8 megapixel front-facing camera inside of the notch here. As you guys and gals can see, if I swipe over there, now I do have the notch turned off in the settings. That's why it looks so symmetrical, but there is a notch up there, just so y'all know. But that notch does house these sensors for the Moto display, so you could do the Moto gestures, and we do have the chop features and all that good stuff built in to the Moto device. So the notch does serve its purpose on your Moto device, but that is a difference there. So we got an 8 megapixel on the Moto for the front and a 12 megapixel on the rear. And in terms of cameras, the Huawei is probably the most versatile camera setup in this video. So the Huawei is packing a triple camera setup on the rear, a 16 megapixel primary wide camera, an ultra wide 8 megapixel camera here, and then a 2 megapixel depth sensor. All right, and it too has a front facing 16 megapixel pop-up camera. All right, so that's what we're looking at in terms of the cameras on these devices. Now, moving on and talking about the resolution for the cameras, this is where the Moto G7 Power shines, in my opinion, because it can record up to 2K at 30 FPS with its primary 12 megapixel camera, whereas the other two devices max out at 1080p at 30 FPS across the board. Now, all three devices can do 720p slow motion at 120 frames per second, but this is where the Huawei has a slight advantage because it can also do 720p slow motion at 480 frames per second, whereas the other two devices max out at 120 frames per second. But that's only for small bursts, but it is an advantage nevertheless. Okay, so that's the hardware setup and some of the differences between the two, or three. Now, all three of these devices do support fingerprint sensors, but they differ in their technology somewhat. So the Bold N1 does have an in-display optical fingerprint sensor that works pretty well after some updates, in my opinion. Y'all can see it's pretty fast. Let's check it one more time. Bam, it's really fast, and it's super convenient to have it built into the front. Whereas on the G7 Power and the Huawei, we have the traditional always active capacitive fingerprint sensors on the rear, and they are super fast. So let me check out the speed for y'all real quick so y'all can see G7 Power. Tap. And the screen lights right up. So super quick, super convenient, and definitely in the right position in my opinion. So once again, tap, lights right up. So super fast, always active capacitive fingerprint sensor. And the same thing goes for the Huawei. So again, in the perfect position, and all you gotta do is tap on it, opens right up. All right, get your nice little haptic feedback, tap, and it opens right up. Okay, bam. So they all three have fingerprint sensors. The Bold has the newer in-display fingerprint sensor, but in my opinion, all three of the fingerprint sensors on these devices are super reliable. Okay, so we went over a large majority of the hardware. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the internals on these, and let's stack them up in terms of performance, in my opinion here. Okay, so we're going to do it like this. Now, in terms of the chipsets, all three chipsets on all three of these devices are octa-core chipsets, but they vary very drastically in terms of where they place. Now, in terms of the Huawei, it's packing Huawei's in-house high-Kirin Silicon 710F octa-core chipset with its Mali MP4 GPU, whereas the Bold N1 is rocking all MediaTek here. It's rocking the MediaTek Helio P70 octa-core chipset, and it's Mali MP3 GPU. So good stuff there. Now this MP3 is a little bit newer than the MP4 on the Huawei. Okay, so in terms of newness, the Bold device is rocking the newer chipset in terms of the adrenals for the differing factors between the Bold and the Huawei. All right, so Helio P70, high-Kirin 710F, and then this bad boy right here, the Moto G7 Power, is rocking the mid-range octa-core Snapdragon 632 chipset on board with its Adreno GPU alternative. Okay, so this is the Adreno 506 GPU and the Snapdragon 632 octa-core chipset. So it does differ in my opinion, but in my opinion, these are all pretty much mid-range devices. Okay, now that pretty much goes over all of the hardware. Now let's take a deeper dive into the software on these. Now, in terms of software, the Bold and the Moto G7 Power are extremely similar, so we're going to start there first, whereas the Huawei is extremely customized. Now, the Bold and the G7 Power are rocking slightly skinned versions of Android 9.0. Now we have Motorola's UX on the G7 Power, which is pretty much stock Android with a few custom features thrown in. So we got the chop chop for the flashlight, okay? We got the twist for the cameras, so on and so forth, okay? I do have that turned off right now, but the Moto experience, in my opinion, in terms of the software to hardware components put together, is the best in terms of the devices that you see on the table. Okay, so it's extremely stock with a few custom gestures thrown in that once you start using, trust me, you're going to wonder why you never were using them on any of your other devices to begin with. Okay, now that's in stark contrast to Bose, again, slightly skinned version of Android 9.0. Now, they have a few features in here, like a few camera features and some gesture controls, but in my opinion, they definitely need to rethink their software approach and their feature set. But again, it is pretty much stock Android, so it does a pretty good job. Okay, so that's it for the Bold. Now, those two devices are in a very deep contrast and comparison to the highly skinned MIUI 9.1 on the Huawei Y9 Prime, which is again built on top of Android 9.0. So this bad boy has a bunch of features on board and a bunch of customization on board. Again, feel free to check out links to my software walkthrough and my setup video. I'll link it up down below for all of these because I've done separate dedicated software videos on all of these, so you can see the features and you can see how I got the setup, so on and so forth. But in terms of software and feature richness or feature packedness, the Huawei is beating these hands down. But in my opinion, it's not about all the features and what you can do in your device. In my opinion, it's about what your device can do for you and how well it integrates into your daily life. And at least in that experience, and in my opinion, the Moto G7 Power in terms of software is the best in terms of these three devices. But there is a big feature gap in between the software on all three of these devices. Okay, just wanted to point that out. Now, in terms of daily performance between the three, all three of these devices do a great job. Now, they are rocking Android, so they do still suffer from the occasional app hiccup and app slowdown as you use them. But as long as you're mindful of the number of apps that you have open in the background, you shouldn't have any issues. So in terms of the software, I'd have to say it's a tie between all three in my opinion. And it really does come down to personal preference and what you think you're going to be able to take advantage of. Now, in my recommendations for software performance, I would recommend that you guys and gals keep no more than 7 to 14 apps open at a time. And then you're going to maintain that smoothness on these devices. Okay, so that pretty much goes over the hardware and the software on these two devices. Now, in terms of hardware, I'm going to have to give the slight advantage to the Moto G7 Power. Sure, it doesn't have the maxed out storage like the other two, but it does something that the other two cannot, and that's the dedicated SIM support and the dedicated micro SD card expansion. So I don't have to choose on the G7 Power if I want to rock one SIM or two and still have micro SD card expansion, whereas I do have to choose on these other two devices. So that for me gave the G7 Power the W in the hardware. And in terms of the software, whereas I said it did come down to personal preference, for me, as I said, in terms of the hardware software combination and feature set, the Moto device is the best in my opinion. So in terms of software and hardware, I'm giving the two W's to the G7 Power. Okay, that's just in my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me down below in the comments. If you want to do so, just keep it respectful, y'all, please. All right. So that covers the hardware and the software. Now, let's keep it moving. Up next now, let's talk about the Wi-Fi between these three devices. Now, in terms of the Wi-Fi on these three devices, they do differ drastically on all three of these devices. Now, I do have to point out that in terms of Wi-Fi, where they differ is the fact that the Bold N1 does support your 2.4 gigahertz band Wi-Fi and your 5 gigahertz band Wi-Fi respectively. So let me show you real quick. Let's pull it up. Okay. All right, let's pull it up. So you can see it's loading up my 2.4 gigahertz band and my 5 gigahertz band respectively. Whereas on the Huawei, And on the Moto, sadly, we just have 2.4 gigahertz band on both of these. So you can see it's not picking up the 5 gigahertz. It's only picking up the 2.4 gigahertz on the Moto. And the same thing could be said for the Huawei. So once again, just the 2.4 gigahertz, whereas the Bold is picking up the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz. So that's the major difference between these three devices. Now, in terms of Wi-Fi performance, my bad, y'all. You know I can't talk sometimes. All three of these devices do a great job, in my opinion. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a YouTube video. And this YouTube video will serve double purposes because it's going to show y'all the Wi-Fi performance, but it's also going to double as a speaker test for these three devices. So all three devices are going to run the same video at max volume. And let me max it out so y'all can see. So we're maxed out over here, 100%. And let's max it out over here, 100%. And let's max it out over here, 100%. So all three devices are maxed out, okay? And now let's go ahead and pull up that YouTube video. And this is some copyright-free music. And y'all feel free to let me know what you think of the overall speaker performance on all three of these devices down below in the comments. Now I'm going to let it play for a little bit so y'all can hear it. Then we're going to scrub through the video to check the performance. And then I'm going to let y'all know how I feel about the overall speaker performance on all three of these devices. So let's start off with the Moto G7 Power. This one has a front-facing speaker, as I said, whereas the other two have bottom-firing speakers. So let's see how it performs in direct comparison to the two bottom-firing speakers. Now let me spin the mic around to give y'all some better audio. Alright, so there we go. And just for reference, this is less than a foot away. And now let's go ahead and load it up and push play. Okay. Okay, let's check the Wi-Fi performance now. Okay, that's it for the Moto. Now let's move on to the Huawei. Let's do the Huawei next. Okay, let's pull it up. And you can see it did have to reload there, so now we got to go find it again, whereas it was ready to go on the Moto G7 Power. Okay, and again, they all three have 4 gigabytes of RAM, so it should have easily been able to retain that, but it didn't. Okay, so here we go. Push play. Okay, let's check the Wi-Fi performance. Okay, that's it for the Huawei. And last but certainly not least, let's check the Bold N1. Let's pull it up. Okay, so this one also had to refresh, even though it was already pre-pulled up in the background. So we gotta go find it again. Again, make sure the volume stayed maxed out. It did, and let's push play. Okay, let's check the Wi-Fi performance. Okay. Alright, and that's it for the Bold N1. Okay, so y'all saw the Wi-Fi performance. Now let's talk about how I feel they performed. So in terms of Wi-Fi, in my opinion, all three devices did a great job. Now in terms of speakers, however, who do I feel did the best? Well, let me readjust the mic here. Okay. Now, in terms of placement, I'm going to have to easily give the W to the Moto G7 Power. Okay. It was a lot easier, harder to obstruct or muffle than the bottom firing speakers on the Huawei or the Bold respectively. So in terms of placement, the G7 Power gets the W. Now, in terms of overall performance, I feel as though all three speakers did a great job. But if I had to pick a winner, I'd have to say in terms of the overall performance, we're giving the win to the Bold N1. In my opinion, it just gets a little bit louder and it's a little bit more bassier to it. Whereas the Huawei is a little bit quieter, but it's clearer. And it also pales in comparison to the Moto G7 Power, which is louder and clearer, but it's really lacking in the bass department. So in terms of the overall speaker performance, we're giving the W to the Bold N1. In terms of the overall speaker placement, we're giving the W to the Moto G7 Power. All right, now let's keep it moving. Up next now, let's talk about the overall, what are we on? LTE and LTE bands. Now, in terms of LTE and LTE bands, okay, two of these devices on the table, the G7 Power and the Huawei, are international unlocked devices, okay? So let me go ahead and pull that up. Thought I had it pulled up, but it cleared itself out there. So let's pull that back up. And that did have to refresh. So this is the European international version of the of the Moto G7 Power. And this is the international version of the Y9 Prime. Okay, so these are both primarily GSM unlocked devices. Let's go ahead and pull that up so y'all can see. Now that one did keep it in memory. And this right here on the Bold is a United States device, but it's only a GSM device, okay? So all three of these devices are GSM unlocked devices. So what does that mean? They'll work on either T-Mobile or AT&T's network or any of their MVNOs. And we did have a slight refresh here on the Bold. So let's run through these bands real quick. And as long as your carrier supports any of these bands that you see on the screen, you should be good to go. So it's not going to work on Sprint, and it's not going to work on Verizon or any of their MVNOs. But if you got T-Mobile or AT&T or any other GSM carrier, you're going to be fine. So this is the bands for the Bold N1. Bam. Right there. My bad, y'all. Sorry for the bumpy cam. This is the bands for the G7 Power. Right there. Let me click it. Make sure it come back up. There you go. So right there. And then, last but certainly not least, we got the bands for the Huawei Y9 Prime. Right there. Okay? So you can see, in terms of overall band support, I'd have to say it goes a little something like this. So if you're looking at it from left to right, the G7 Power, in my opinion, has the most bands, followed by the Bold N1, followed by the Huawei Y9 Prime. Okay? So that's just one thing I wanted to keep in mind for y'all. Now, in terms of overall performance, now I've used all three of these devices on AT&T and T-Mobile respectively, and I feel they've all done a great job in terms of data and mobile performance. Now we're going to talk about the phone calls in a little bit here, but in terms of data and performance, they all three did a great job in my opinion. Okay, now moving on, the next thing I want to talk about with y'all is the Bluetooth and the overall Bluetooth performance on these. Now this is where they differ yet again. Now from right to left, you're going to see the newer to older technologies here, okay? So the Huawei Y9 Prime has Bluetooth 5.0. The Bold N1 has Bluetooth 4.1. And then the Moto G7 Power has Bluetooth 4.1. Now, all three Bluetooth versions, in my opinion, perform great. And I haven't had any issues with the Bluetooth on either device. Well, at least for the Bold, this is my second unit, and I haven't had any problems. And in terms of Bluetooth, they all three work flawlessly without issues. Alright, so you can see and get a general idea of how many devices that I've connected up to each. Now, the Moto G7 Power is my emergency device, and I only connect up to it headphones or earphones that I plan to keep. So if you were wondering why the G7 Power has less previous devices connected up to it, that's because when I was done, I just kept on here the earbuds or Bluetooth accessories that I plan to keep. The other two, these get tested on the regular, so you can see they have more devices connected up to them. Okay, but in terms of the overall Bluetooth and Bluetooth performance, all three of these devices did a great job, and regardless of the versions or technology that's on board, I'm going to have to call this Bluetooth category a tie between all three. Okay, now moving on, the next thing I want to talk about with y'all is the GPS performance between these three devices. And you can see we got another refresh on the Huawei. Let's go ahead and pull up the GPS test that I ran on all three. So there's the Huawei. Here is the Bold. And once again, it had to refresh, but it recovered nicely there. So let's pull that up. And then let's pull up the GPS test on the G7 Power here. Let's go ahead and pull that up. Okay, now in terms of the GPS and GPS performance, I have to say all three of these devices did a great job. Now in terms of GPS, this is a really important category for me because this is something that I use every day on a regular basis. Okay, so the fact that all three of these devices did a great job, that's just another feather in the cap for all three of these devices. But I have to say this. On paper and during the testing that I did, the Huawei and the Bold seem to have a further distance of lock on. So you can see, regardless of how many times I ran the test, the Huawei and the Bold pretty much only came down to an accuracy of 5 meters. Now, that's not as good as what I'm typically used to seeing. Typically, what I like to see is anywhere from 3 meters to 4 meters. But in terms of overall usage, they still performed without issue. But I just wanted to point that out. So you can see, got 5 meters on here with 12 satellites in use, with 18 satellites in view for the Huawei. We got 5 meters on here with 15 satellites in use and 20 satellites in view for the Bold. And then we got 12 satellites in use here, 4 meters with 16 in view for the G7 Power. So you can see in terms of strength, the G7 Power is a little bit weaker than the other two, but in terms of accuracy, it's a little bit more accurate. But putting the numbers and testing aside, in terms of overall GPS performance, all three devices, in my opinion, did a great job. So this is another category that we're going to have to call a tie. All right, now let's keep it moving. Up next now, let's talk about the call quality and speaker call quality on all three of these devices. And this video might get cut into two because I'm running out of time here. So y'all might see this in two parts. I'll be sure to stitch it back together though. So I do apologize for that break in the video that y'all are going to see. But next, let's talk about the call quality and speaker call quality on all three of these. I keep saying both because I'm used to doing this 2 devices at a time, not 3. But let's talk about the call quality on all 3 of these. Now, as I said before, I tested all 3 of these on AT&T and T-Mobile respectively, and I couldn't really test it with my main Verizon SIM because none of these are globally unlocked. These are all 3 GSM carriers. But testing it on T-Mobile and AT&T, I have to say in terms of phone calls, they all did pretty good. Now in terms of receiver phone calls and clarity, I have to say if I was going to pick a winner, I probably have to pick the G7 Power. Calls were very loud, crisp, and clear, and I had no issues. Whereas in terms of phone call performance, if I had to rank these, I'd have to say the phone call performance with extended testing probably goes something like this. So the receiver calls on the Huawei were pretty good, but they pale in comparison to the speakerphone calls on the Bold. All right. So whereas overall the Moto G7 is getting the win for receiver phone calls and speakerphone calls because it was crisp and clear throughout, in terms of how these two stack up, they kind of trade blows. So it's better on the receiver for the Huawei, but it's better on the speaker for the Bold. All right. But in terms of call quality and speaker call quality, we're giving the Moto the win here, in my opinion. All right. Now, moving on. The next thing that I want to talk about with y'all is I want to briefly give y'all my opinions on the cameras on these devices. Now, I've done separate dedicated camera videos on all of these. I'll be sure to link that down below in the video description because I'm not going to have enough cards to use up on this video. So I'll link up everything y'all need to know down below in the video description as space allows. So the cameras on the G7 Power are the same primary cameras on the regular G7. So we got a 12 megapixel rear and an 8 megapixel front. So y'all check out that camera video if y'all want to see how these cameras perform. And I've done separate dedicated camera videos on the Bold and the Huawei respectively. Again, I'll link that up down below in the video description for y'all to check out. That being said, when I judge these cameras, I judge it on 3 different categories, okay? Point and shoot photo performance, point and shoot video performance, and then audio capture capabilities. And I would have to say, in terms of all 3 of these categories, all of these phones did a great job. But if I had to pick a winner, I'm going to have to give the W in this category to the Moto G7 Power yet again. In my experience, it was just a lot easier to use and the results were a lot more predictable, whereas the Bold and the Huawei, they kind of struggled with exposure for photos, and the Huawei in particular struggled with exposure for videos as well, which is something the Bold did as well, but it wasn't as bad as the Huawei. But if I had to pick a winner, I would have to give it to the Moto G7 Power, in my opinion. I know what I'm going to get out of this camera every time I pick it up, and it's something that I really like. And it's not just getting a W in terms of that it can do more, it's getting a W because in terms of those 3 categories, it does a better job than these other 3. But again, y'all pause this video, y'all check out some of the photo samples, y'all check out some of the video samples, and y'all come back and let me know your opinions down below in the comments of this video right here. So in terms of the camera performance, we're giving the W to the Moto G7 Power. That being said, in terms of versatility, I'd have to give it to the Huawei, okay? It is what it is. Now, let's keep it moving. This would be an area where I talk about the gaming performance, but I've done separate dedicated gaming videos on all of these. Now, once again, the main chipset on the G7 Power is the same as the G7, so y'all can check out that gaming performance video that I've done. But I do think I've also done a separate dedicated gaming performance video on this, so I'll link up the associated videos for y'all to check out in the video description on all three of these. But in terms of gaming performance, all three of these devices did a great job, and I didn't have any issues on any of them, okay? So if you're a gamer, whether it be heavy or light, you're not going to have any issues with either of these devices, okay? So let's keep it moving. Now, the next category I want to talk about with y'all is the benchmarks. Now, I do not like covering benchmarks. We've reached a area today where the manufacturers pretty much have the benchmarks down to a science, so it means absolutely nothing now. What we should care about as end users is the overall combination of hardware and software that equates to a smooth and fluid user experience, which I feel all of these devices deliver. But I know there are some guys and gals out there that do like to see the benchmark performance, so we're going to run through this quick, fast, and in a hurry for y'all to check out. Now, one thing that I want to mention is that in terms of the benchmarks, in terms of the Geekbench, the Moto G7 Power, when I did this, it was running an older version of Geekbench, so those scores are going to differ dramatically as opposed to the scores you're going to see on the Bold and the Huawei respectively, which when I did it, it was running the newer version of Geekbench. But that's just something I want to point out. So if y'all see a big discrepancy in the scores, it just has more to do with the version upgrade on the Geekbench 4 to Geekbench 5. All right, so let's run through this quick, fast, and in a hurry. So in terms of the Bold N1 gets the clear win here, beating out the G7 Power and the Huawei by a nice 6,000 to 5,000 respectively. So the Bold scored a 20,307 compared to the Huawei's 15,764 and the Moto's 14,599. Okay, moving on now, going over to the Antutu scores, you're going to see another big difference here, because in terms of Antutu, this is where the Huawei won, scoring a 149,961 compared to the Bold's 141,269 and the G7's 104,263. So the Huawei, at least for the Antutu scores, gets the clear win here. And you can see the individual breakdowns here. Feel free to pause and check it out. Let me give y'all a close-up on this one because that one's kind of unclear. So y'all can see that. Okay. But that's that. Now, if we keep it moving, up next, we get into the Geekbench scores here. Okay. And again, this is where I want to point out that discrepancy. These two are running the newer Geekbench 5, whereas the G7 Power is running the Geekbench 4. So you can see there's a major difference in scores here for Geekbench, but all three of these devices did a great job here. Now we jump over to the compute tests on all three, and again, that same discrepancy applies, but you can see in terms of the computing power, I would have to say the Bold N1 is the better of the three, okay? So you can see it scored a 1226 to the Huawei's 938 and to the Moto's 2719. Now, if I did the Geekbench 5 test on the Moto, it will probably come in somewhere around the 1,000 to 1,100 mark. So the Bold will be slightly better in my opinion. Okay, but you can see in terms of processing power, the Bold got everybody. Alright, moving on now, let's go into some older benchmarks here that I still like to run, because if y'all check out any of my videos and you go to the benchmark section, you can see how the older devices stack up to the newer devices with these benchmarks that I'm getting ready to talk about. So this is the Volemo metal test, and this benchmark is not available on the Play Store anymore, but I have the APK and it's something that I still like to run, and you can see almost all of these devices max out the test. Now, the Bold and the Huawei did indeed max out the test, where the Moto G7 Power came in slightly under. So what the metal test does is it taxes the hardware on your device, and then it spits out an overall average score in comparison to the test. So you can see this is where the Huawei surprisingly takes the W here, scoring a 29.94 to the Bose 28.12 and to the Moto's 22.57. Okay, so at least where the hardware is concerned and benchmarks, the Huawei is doing a better job than the other two devices. But I digress. It's just pretty much scores at this point. So moving on, we now have the Volemo multi-core test, and you're going to see a big difference here, but all three of these devices max out the test, and this is, as the name implies, it's just testing the multi-core performance. And you can see in terms of multi-core performance, the Bold did the better job out of all three of these devices, scoring a 38.73 to the Huawei's 36.73 and to the Moto's 3200. So you can see in terms of multi-core performance, at least for this benchmark, the Bold is taking the W. Alright, now let's get into one of my favorite benchmarks. Let's get into the multitasking benchmark performance. Now this is the DiscoMark multitasking benchmark, and this lets you load up any app on your device. It will cycle through those apps a set number of times, in this case it's 5 times, and give you an average time that the device took to get through all the apps, and give you the individual app load up times. Okay, and you can see, at least where this is concerned, the Bold N1 takes the W. So it scored an average time of 1.388 seconds. And just to put that into perspective for y'all, I typically run anywhere from 17 to 21 apps on my devices. So the fact that it got such a good time, my mind was blown. And that's in direct comparison to the Huawei's 4.532 seconds. Okay, right there. And the Moto's 6.779 seconds. So in terms of app opening speeds, the Moto was the slowest, and in terms of app opening speeds, the Bold was the fastest, with the Huawei landing somewhere in the middle. But that being said, talking about the memory management on all three of these devices, I'd have to say it was roughly the same. So I typically run this test about 3 to 5 times, and then I just screenshot the last test that I ran. So in terms of memory management, it did a good job loading up the apps, and then somewhere around the 3rd run, it had to refresh the apps. It was in memory for the 4th run, and then right around the 5th run, it had to refresh the apps. So in my opinion, the memory management on all three of these devices does need a little bit of work, but for what it is, it's pretty good. Alright? And that pretty much does it for the benchmarks on all of these. Alright? Just so y'all can see the scores and the app breakdowns and app load up times there, I just wanted to do this side by side so y'all can see. Alright, so now let's move on. And now let's get into another important category that is important to consider. Let's talk about the overall battery life and the overall charge times on these three devices. Now, some considering factors that I want y'all to keep in mind when you are thinking about battery life. Number 1 is the display and the resolution and the display technologies. The display on smart devices is one of the biggest power draws. Okay, so once again, let me recap. 1080p on the Bold, and that's 1080p by 2340. 1080p on the Huawei, again 1080p by 2340, and 720p on the Moto G7 Power. So that's 720p by 1520 or 1530. So 19 by 9, 19 by 9, and 19 by 9 aspect ratios on all three of these devices. Again, 720p, 1080p, and 1080p. Now, what you want to pay attention to is the resolution and the technologies. So Super AMOLED, IPS LCD, IPS LCD. So the IPS LCD panels are going to draw more power. Okay, it just is what it is. The Super AMOLED technology, if you run a black background, the pixels that are being used are only going to be used based on what's on the screen. So if you run a black background, you're turning off a large majority of the pixels and you're saving more power. Okay? Now, unfortunately for the Bold, that didn't translate into good battery life nevertheless, but that's one key factor that I want y'all to keep in mind. Another key factor is the battery size and the battery capacity. So again, 3,500 milliamps for the Bold N1, 4,000 milliamps for the Huawei Y9 Prime, and 4,850 milliamps for the Moto G7 Power. Okay? Next is the charging capacities and amperage. So 18 watt fast charging, okay, 15 watt to 18 watt fast charging, and then 15 watt to 18 watt fast charging depending on your region. Now, if you pick up this device in Germany, you're going to get 18 watt fast charging. But anywhere else, you're going to get 15 watt turbo power fast charging. All right, just wanted to point that out. Now, in terms of the battery life, we're going to start there. All three of these devices with light to moderate use can get you through the day. But other than that, with light to moderate use for the Moto G7 Power, you're going to get anywhere from about 3 to 5 days. Okay? Light to moderate use for the Bold and the Huawei, you're going to get like a day, maybe a day and a half. Okay? With my style of heavy usage, I can still easily get 3 days on the Moto G7 Power. Whereas with my style of heavy usage, I'm getting a day on the Huawei, but I still do have to charge the Bold one additional time to get through the day. So putting that into perspective for y'all in terms of screen on time, with my style of heavy usage, I'm getting anywhere from about 10 to 15 hours on the Moto G7 Power, which is phenomenal. On the Huawei, I'm getting anywhere from about 8 to 10 hours of screen on time, which is good. It could be better. And then on the Bold, I'm getting anywhere from 6.5 to 8.5 hours of screen on time. Now, I did squeeze out 10 hours, but I essentially had to make this a Wi-Fi only device to squeeze out 10 hours on the Bold. But realistically, I'm getting about 6.5 to 8.5 hours of on-screen time on the Bold. So that just goes to show you, although the Bold does have the better technology, sadly, it doesn't always equal better battery life. Okay? So now let's move on to the overall charge times. Now again, all three of these devices support fast charging. Okay? But in terms of the charge times, I would have to say the Bold N1 is taking the W here. Now, on average, it can charge up in about an hour and 50 minutes to a little bit over 2 hours, whereas these other two devices are taking about 2.5 hours and upwards, depending on when you put them on the charger. Okay? Another thing that I like on the Bold is that it also supports fast wireless charging at 10 watts, whereas the other two devices do not. You just have the wired charging on the other two devices. So that's something that I wanted to point out there. So in terms of the overall charge times, we're giving that to the Bold. But, you know, I was kind of expecting that because this has the smallest battery and it also has the more efficient technologies on board. So I was kind of expecting that. So just so we could run through that again. Wow, this video getting pretty long. In terms of the battery life, giving that W to the Moto G7 Power. In terms of the charge times, we're giving that W to the Bold N1. Okay? Alright, so that pretty much covers that. And now we've reached the end of the video. And if you guys and gals sat down and watched this whole thing to the end, I really do appreciate it. You don't know how much. Okay? That being said, now let's talk about the price and let's get into my overall recommendations and final thoughts. Alright, so we're not going to mince words here. In terms of pricing, the Moto G7 Power is the cheapest one on this table. Now, full retail, I was able to pick this one up for $184 and change. Now, I was able to pick this one up on the Amazon payment program, and that means that I'm paying $34 and change for 5 months for this. So I still have one more payment left on this one before it's fully paid off. I might just pay it off before my birthday so I could pick up something else. Okay, so full retail though, it's about $184 and about 50 or 40 cents. I'll have the screenshot up in post so y'all know exactly what I paid for this. And now, full retail on the Huawei, I paid $228, including the tax for this one. Full retail on the Bold N1, I paid after tax, it was about $280. 80 bucks, my bad, y'all. Excuse me. So in terms of the most expensive device on the table, it would have to go a little something like this if we go from right to left. Okay, so the Bold N1 is the most expensive, followed by the Huawei, followed by the Moto G7 Power, bringing up the rear. Okay, calm down, son, calm down. That was a slip. Now, that being said, right now today, as of the recording of this video, you can pick up these devices for some really great prices. Okay, and we're just going to talk about the max variants of these devices. So right now today, you can pick up the Bold N1 as of the recording of this video for 200 bucks. Okay, that doesn't include tax. That's from their site directly and Amazon. Right now today, you can pick up the Huawei Y9 Prime, ranging in price from 215 bucks to 225 bucks. So a little bit cheaper than what I paid for it. Not bad. And right now today, you can pick up the Moto G7 Power, ranging in price from about $150 to $250, depending on the RAM storage variant and where you pick it up from. And I would always recommend that you go with the max variants of these devices. Okay, but based on your region, you might be stuck with a certain level of device. Now, if you're talking about connectivity and all that, I would actually recommend the 332 variant of this, because that's the globally unlocked variant, and it will work across all major carriers in the States and all GSM carriers abroad. So you will take a performance dip there, but again, you're gonna have wide carrier support. Okay, whereas if you go with the maxed out version that y'all see in this video, you're stuck to GSM carriers. So based on that, if you want the maximum carrier support, I would actually say go for the cheaper variant, which does take a bump down in specs. But if you want the maxed out version, be prepared to be relegated to or limited to GSM carriers. Okay, but if we're just talking about based on pricing alone, which one would I recommend? I'd have to say go with the Moto G7 Power. You won't be disappointed, trust me. And you'll be surprised just how good the overall battery life is. Okay, now if we're talking about overall feature set and convenience, then I would have to say go with the Bold N1. Again, that wireless charging and that display, in my opinion, does make a difference. Y'all know I'm disabled, so I really enjoy the fact that when I need to charge this device, I just walk it over to any one of my wireless charging pads, put it down, and it starts charging. So no need to fight with cables or anything like that, and that's a big feature in my opinion. So if you want a feature-packed device with a really good display and you're okay with paying a little bit of extra money, I would say go with the Bold N1. Now, if you're talking about you want a really big display with some really good battery life and some super versatile cameras, then I would say go with the Huawei Y9 Prime. Sure, you don't have the 2K or 4K video recording, but the overall versatility and capabilities of these cameras are really, really good in my opinion. So if you want cameras and versatility, go with the Huawei Y9 Prime. Okay, if you want feature set with a really solid display, go with the Bold N1. And if you want just the overall best bang for your buck device, go with the Moto G7 Power. Okay, so that pretty much does it for this versus / comparison video. I hope you guys and gals enjoyed the video and found it helpful. I hope everyone has a great day, and I will catch you guys and gals in the next one. Have a good one, everybody. Peace. We are out of here. Man, I haven't made a video this long in a minute. We gone.